Hello and welcome to the College Investor Audio Show. We are truly honored that you're here today as we take a look at how accurate college costs actually are. You can find this article plus tons of resources at thecollegeinvestor.com. You can also follow us all over social media. Just search for The College Investor and you'll pretty much find us wherever you're hanging out. We're going to be there too. We'd love to get to know you better and help you along in your journey. So, how accurate are college costs anyway? Let's take a look. According to a new report from Burton Advocates for Youth, JBAY, nice little name, College Cash Uncovered, there are significant discrepancies between colleges' published cost of attendance or COA budgets and the actual expenses students face. Thanks a lot, guys. These discrepancies contribute to college affordability challenges and inadequate financial aid, of course. So this leaves some students with financial gaps of like 10 grand or more. Burton Advocates for Youth, I'm going to say JBAY from now on, is a nonprofit organization, by the way, and they focus on improving the lives of youth who have experienced foster care or homelessness. They're amazing. They work on policy advocacy and providing resources to at-risk youth, including stable housing, education, healthcare, and even financial support. The organization tries to address higher education access to financial aid and foster youth transitions into adulthood. Okay, so what is the cost of attendance? A college's cost of attendance, or COA, is supposed to measure the total annual college costs, for a student to attend the college. Each college may have some different cost of attendance. Now, the cost of attendance includes both direct and indirect costs. Direct costs are paid to the college, while indirect costs just are not. The distinction doesn't really matter much for families since they have to pay for both direct and indirect, and financial aid eligibility is based on the combination of direct and indirect costs anyway. But, and it's a big but, some colleges and trade groups emphasize just the direct costs, especially when trying to convince people that college costs have not increased. That's a little slimy, don't you think? The cost of attendance, sometimes called a student budget, includes allowances for the following things: tuition and fees, room and board, housing and food. The housing allowance for college-owned or operated housing must be based on the average or median housing charges, whichever is greater. The allowance for food must provide the equivalent of 3 meals a day. Books, supplies, course materials, and equipment. This includes an allowance for personal computer, in addition to textbooks and all that kind of stuff. Transportation. This allowance has to cover the cost of commuting between school, home, and work. The transportation allowance does not include the cost of buying a car, just the incremental cost of transportation itself. Miscellaneous personal stuff, like laundry, clothing, toiletries, and personal needs, and some other costs are thrown in too. This can include dependent care costs, disability-related expenses, study abroad expenses, and loan fees for federal loans, not private loans. It can also include the cost of professional licensing and certification and the cost of first professional credentials. Dependent care costs include but are not limited to class time, study work, field work, internships, and even commuting time. The cost of attendance is used to determine eligibility for need-based financial aid. Financial need is defined as the difference between the cost of attendance, COA, and the Student Aid Index. The Student Aid Index, by the way, was previously known as the Expected Family Contribution, which wasn't confusing at all. So, what are the most significant problems with the cost of attendance? Let's take a look at this and take a deep dive, shall we? We shall. Some allowances in the cost of attendance differ from actual student expenses. Colleges tend to, routinely underestimate allowances for textbooks, transportation. Some of the cost of attendance allowances are averages, too, as opposed to the actual costs. Students from at-risk populations often have above-average costs, and the accuracy of cost allowances is often unreliable. In a whole bunch of cases, colleges use outdated figures, adjusted only by a standard inflation rate over the years. Come on. And this fails to capture actual cost increases for sure. At nearly a third of colleges, the non-tuition costs have not been adjusted for inflation at all, which is ridiculous. And additionally, as if that wasn't enough, allowances for off-campus housing often underestimate true cost, especially since rent is typically higher in college towns. A bunch of expenses are omitted from the COA. Many fees are not even included in the allowance for tuition and fees. Why would you not include the fees if you're saying fees in the name of the thing? Technology fees, for instance, activity fees, athletic fees, orientation fees, health center fees, library fines, lab fees, transcript fees, graduation fees, and the list goes on and on and on. Fees upon fees upon fees. Technology costs like computers, software, and peripherals are often omitted from the COA. As if you didn't need a computer anymore, right? Allowances for transportation often omit the cost of parking, insurance, and maintenance. Housing allowances often omit the cost of utilities, electricity, heating, phone, internet, renter's insurance, and security deposits. There may also be frat and sorority dues, too. The cost of attendance often doesn't include the cost of health insurance, insurance deductibles, co-pays, and over-the-counter medicine. Colleges routinely omit allowances for dependent care and disability expenses. Students just have to know to ask for these allowances. The JBAY report points out that cost of attendance budgets often fail to consider regional variations and the unique needs of diverse student populations, such as childcare or even disability-related costs. This results in a misleading representation of the final financial burden on students. Now let's move on to consequences of the shortfall in the COA. Now, the JBAY report identifies discrepancies between colleges' published COA budgets and the actual expenses students face. Underestimating actual living costs makes college just simply unaffordable for many students, especially those from at-risk populations with limited financial resources. Discrepancies in COA budgets. We've talked about some, but there are more. A lot of colleges significantly underestimate the actual expenses faced by students, particularly for low-income, foster care, youth, and other vulnerable groups. There's a wide gap between the published COA, or cost of attendance, figures and the true costs for housing, food, and transportation, especially in high-cost regions. This discrepancy just results in a much heavier financial burden than is actually reflected in the college's official COA estimates. According to the report, over half of colleges use cost of attendance budgets that fail to account for the actual expenses, with underestimations sometimes exceeding $10,000 per year. Many students face food and housing insecurity and are unable to absorb discrepancies in the college cost of attendance, further exacerbating their financial hardships. Disproportionate impact on vulnerable students. The inaccurate COA estimates disproportionately harm low-income students, too, who often struggle to even cover the true costs, despite receiving financial aid. The standardized cost of attendance budgets fail to consider the unique circumstances of foster youth and students without family support who actually lack access to parental housing during school breaks. This unmet need for former foster care students is nearly double that of their peers. Additionally, students with children have substantially greater expenses than the costs included in the student's budget. These inaccurate estimates result in severe financial stress, making it difficult for these students to succeed and persist in their academic pursuits. Often they just have to drop out. Lack of transparency in calculating non-tuition costs. Let's talk about this. Many colleges do not disclose how they calculate non-tuition costs within the cost of attendance budget, nor do they even proactively inform students about the process for requesting an adjustment based on actual expenses. This lack of transparency, as you can imagine, makes it kind of difficult for students to appeal for a higher cost of attendance even when their expenses exceed the college's estimates. And additionally, there can be significant variations in non-tuition cost estimates among colleges in the same geographic region. Inadequate financial aid is the last point we'll talk about. Before we wrap up for today, the underestimates of actual college costs lead to lower financial aid offers that just don't meet the student's actual need. The gaps in aid make college unaffordable for low-income families, middle-income families, forcing them to work excessive hours, borrow from private student loan programs, which is not good, and enroll part-time instead of full-time. Ultimately, these financial pressures increase the likelihood that the students are just going to drop out of college. All right, now let's wrap up with report's recommendations. The JBAY report makes several recommendations for better aligning cost of attendance estimates with actual student expenses. This hopefully will help bridge financial gaps and support student success. Number one, colleges need to improve the accuracy of cost of attendance calculations, of course. Two, the calculation of non-tuition expenses, housing, books, transportation must be standardized with consideration of local and regional cost differences. Three, colleges must enhance the support for students needing financial aid adjustments and ensure that the adjustments reflect the student's specific circumstances. Four, financial aid awards must be increased to cover the gap between the cost of attendance and the student's ability to actually pay. Number five, the financial aid application and award process must be streamlined to avoid introducing barriers to college access and success. If you want to dive deeper into this report and see how accurate your college costs are, you can take a look at it at thecollegeinvestor.com. You can also find us if you have questions, comments, concerns about anything we talk about. You can always let us know at The College Investor. Just search for us anywhere on social media, and you'll probably see us wherever you are. Thanks again for stopping by today, and we'll talk to you again real soon.